Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable, the last one of July and episode 187. Huge welcome to you all. It's an honour to still be running this and to see this still running throughout the holidays. We did a few years ago wonder whether or not to continue running it during the summer holidays, and we're still finding we're getting 40, 50 people a week, but more people than ever catching up on the recording. So if you are catching up on this a bit later, a huge welcome to you too. My name's Matt Baird. I've been running the Social Housing Roundtable now for best part of 5 years, but really over the last 3 years where it's taken off. We have deep dived into more topics than I can possibly remember, and yet there's always new stuff coming forth. And I want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers who come forward each week with ideas and thoughts. I did put out a call for speakers last week, and we've now got enough speakers, I think, to run us through to about the end of February. But if you're interested in being involved in future sessions, do please reach out. We're still planning, organising, making sure we don't get the same topics each week and all that kind of stuff. So please do continue reaching out. And I also want to say a huge thank you to Alertical and to CMSG for sponsoring the roundtable through 2025. Finally, day-to-day I work in recruitment. This has been my passion, I think is probably the right word. Basically, it's been the day-to-day job now for 14 odd years, and I set up on my own and partnered with a company called Spirehouse 4 years ago. So if you are looking for recruitment support, please do reach out. I know things are difficult out there at the moment, but if you are looking for a trusted recruitment partner, A, I'd love to work with you, and B, it literally keeps this running for free for everyone to be able to attend. So we'd love to have your voice. Now, as many of you might have known, last week I put out a post, yes, calling out for speakers, but also saying, hi, everybody, our speaker for this week has dropped out, who can help? And a lot of people said, well, we'd love to do one in December or November. And I was like, that's great, but I need one for the 29th of July. And many of you who are regular attendees of the roundtable and of the forum will recognise Jamie Adam, who regularly has attended, has been to a number of sessions with us over the course of this year and previously, and stepped forward and said, Matt, I was going to talk to you at some point about maybe doing a session I can do next week. With I'm free. Do you fancy putting something together? Which I've said, yes, please, because it makes my job a lot easier when someone who's been to the roundtable before knows the format. And I've heard Jamie speak. We've conversed on this a number of times, although never actually off this platform until this week. And I think there could be a really fascinating discussion around what he's doing up at Berneslai Homes and communities and everything else that's going to go on today. So without further ado, Jamie, I'm going to pass across to you to introduce yourself, the topic, and why you wanted to bring it to the forum today, but also just a huge thank you to you for stepping in last minute.
You are very welcome, Matt, and good morning to everybody. It is great to, well, I would say it's great to see you, but it's online, so I'm not really sure that I can, but it's great that you are all here. It is an absolute honour to be able to share with you this morning for probably one of the best conversations that we might be having in the social housing sector, and that's not because it's me. That's because it is the Social Housing Roundtable. This is a fantastic forum. It's been my delight to hear some of the presentations that have gone off over the last few months that I've been honoured to be able to join with everybody. And the conversation and the discussion here is so rich, so deep, and so broad that I think it is it's almost a catalyst for what good might come from the future. And I think maybe in months, years, even to come, when good things happen in the UK, in social housing and beyond, perhaps we might just be able to trace some of that goodness right the way back to conversations that we're having here. Let me just start sharing this. And Matt, could you just let me know if that's coming up?
Again, we're up, Jamie.
Oh, fantastic stuff. So yes, I am Jamie Adam, and I am the performance guy at Berneslai Homes in South Yorkshire, glorious Barnsley, South Yorkshire. It's a wonderful place to be, and I'm not just saying that because I'm biased, I'm saying it because it's true. So I'm involved in everything to do with performance, whether that's contractually, whether it's regulatory, or whether it's just answering those two beautiful questions. How good are we really doing? And how do we know? That's where I spend a lot of my time. But what I want to share with you this morning, partly as an introduction to a great conversation that we're going to have later, and by all means, feel free to add in the chat as we go on any questions, any thoughts. If you're all silent, this is going to be half an hour and then we'll go home. Alternatively, it could be the start of some really good conversations. But what I want to really talk about this morning is communities of communities in communities. And it's really the idea that the places where we live, the people that we engage with, that we provide services for, that we live among, that we serve, that we exist alongside. What do we mean when we talk about these communities? And is there something greater and bigger perhaps than we've been imagining before? So whatever happened to community? So we're a few years in post-COVID, but I think still we are suffering the consequences or dealing with the fallout of what happened through the years that we were experiencing everything that went off there. And it really put into the public perception, specifically within social housing, but far more widely as well. What do we understand by community? And it's certainly not a linear thing. I'd like you to think of a school of fish. Fish, they move together because, not necessarily because there's one that's in charge, but because they sense each other. Well, social housing is definitely not a fish. I'd like to put it to you that it's more of an aquarium. There's sharks, there's goldfish, there's algae, there's all kinds of everything that are all shoved into the same tank. And yet somehow we remain shocked when they don't swim in harmony. There was a piece put out by the UCL, University College London Policy Lab, I think with Citizens UK and More in Common, called This Place Matters, seeking to provide local government, national government with a blueprint for what good policy cohesion actually looks like, and start to ask some of these questions here. It is a bit of a fishy tale. How do we create schools of social housing fish, of different types of fish, of absolutely every description, where we can sense each other, where we can be aware of the greater stories that are happening in our, not just in our community, but amongst our communities? That will probably require a change of language. It will require a change of intent. It'll probably encounter a change of heart. And a lot of the language that we actually use is going to be absolutely key to this as we move forward. So I mentioned the UCL project, This Place Matters. When it was launched, not so long back now, there were focus group analysis was commissioned, just having a look at challenges that were going off. They polled over 13,000 people. And the findings said that a plurality of people, not just a lot of, but a plurality, which is an interesting word, definitely felt disconnected. Evidence in things like they feel strangers in their own country, and that was from people of every description. There was no particular hallmark or demographic that stood out. Particularly, there was quite some surprises. Asian British people, in fact, are described as the most likely ethnic group to feel strange in their own country, even more so than other groups that we have going off here. But the key pictures that were coming through were a picture of growing skepticism and mistrust, particularly among the young. They said that 7% of 18 to 24-year-olds think that most people can be trusted, which was far lower than people slightly older, like what I am. What we have is organizations trying to do the right thing by themselves, all by themselves. And that's part of the problem that we are encountering. We have this strange word in social housing, tenants. It's a great word. It says a lot, and it means precisely what it says on the tin. But is that all our people that we serve are? Well, of course not. That is a rhetorical question. They are more. They are members of the local youth choir. They are engaged in building a youth centre. They are people who walk their dog every day in the park. They have lives, and they are engaged in communities within the communities in which they live and in which providers actually provide for them. How much of that is part of the discussion of providers when services are made or analysed or tweaked or adapted, when discussions are held, when processes are mapped and drawn, when intent is made, when budgets are written, rewritten, burnt and rewritten again? Where are these conversations actually being had? And do we understand not just our people, but do we understand the communities that we are actually trying to serve? And do we serve them for their own sake, or purely because of the lens through which we operate as housing providers? I'm going to talk about the great we. There's a great onus within the social housing sector of listening to tenants, hearing the tenant voice, bringing them in, where the great end is connection. I'd say that actually connection's not that great a word. It's powerful, it's beautiful, but there's something more powerful that I'd like to share with you, and that's connectivity. There's something in the coaching world which talks about, are people coachable? Do they have a capacity to be coached? Do our organizations have the ability to connect? Not just that they have a valid connection. Are we able to plug into every situation in which we encounter ourselves, whether it's with engaged tenants or whatever phrase different provider services have, or any other community groups, so that we can get a pulse of what is actually happening within the areas, within the communities that we serve, and the communities of communities that we exist within. When housing groups don't link the community to each other, trust breaks down and services fail. You hear this phrase, you don't listen. For those who are married, you might hear this from your other half. I'm making no comments myself here, but at the same time, this phrase crops up so much. Think of recent reports that have come out from the sector. Think about more widely the number of times that communication and the sense of not being heard, not being listened to, not being understood are highlighted as perhaps the most pivotal aspects of the cause of problems, even the cause of disaster. If you want to go even further back and outside the sector, anyone remember the Piper Alpha disaster in last century, or even Sellafield, if you want to go even further back, when the analysis were done of either when the oil rig was burnt out at sea, or Sellafield, where nuclear material was released actually into the sea in error. There were mechanical issues that were identified, of course. That's by the by. But one of the key aspects was how communication undermined the process of sharing some of the minor issues that became major issues that got out of hand and caused disaster. The sense of importance was lost and no one was listening. So what are we to do? Are we to get the pulse of our community? Are we to understand actually what is happening in and amongst the places where we live? Do we know? Are we almost ahead of the game? Can we anticipate where the trends are going in the places that we serve, the places where we live? Are we so connected that we hear about things as they are happening, or are we always scrambling to play catch up? The Collaborate program, I think that was out of UCL over the last couple of years. Some of their outcomes demonstrating, perhaps as we knew, that peer-led cross-organizational collaboration between staff members, between tenants, between those engaged in the sector, between stakeholders, between people just who happen to live in the area and show a keen passion or interest, creates effective outcomes, including better resident engagement, improved compliance with regulatory obligations, and perhaps even more so, a sense that all of these things provide only the baseline from which organizations can cast a line into an ideal future and begin having those conversations with the great others in our community, of what we might do and how we might forge a path together ahead, understanding the obligations of organizations and providers, of course, but at the same time, understanding that we never do this alone. If we are to make a great change for the future, it will take all of us. If we're not all in the loop, someone will always be left out in the cold. I'll ask you this question. Are we landlords? Are we something better? And I've just realized that there's something there that shouldn't have been there. That should have popped up later. Oh, well, no plan survives first contact, hey? One of the bits of research from TPAS back in 2019 and replicated again this year was talking about the importance of engagement with others. And it highlights, when I was reading through some of the information, it highlights for me kind of the dark side of democratization of services, where there are clamoring voices, all expecting, all rightly requesting, even demanding places at the table, something to be heard. What that should do is create insight, generate wisdom, help with connectivity, build connection, build partnership, help create communities within providers that can bring in the whole community of communities and create something for the future. The dark side is that when voices become elevated beyond the sense of right partnership, how do we rein ourselves in? How do we make sure that we cannot do everything at the same time? And perhaps what we need is reallocation of resource as much as we might need greater imagination or understanding. We don't need to do everything, perhaps, but we really do need to connect everyone. I was at an event at a school here in Berneslai not so long back, and it came with this idea of, are we led or driven? I did an exercise for some of the students. They were in Key Stage 3, and we were looking at business processes. And I give them a challenge. How do you improve a very simple social housing process? In this case, a repair. I asked them, I want you to improve it. And when I got blank looks back, I explained, I want you to decide what better might look like. And off you go. And I got some incredible results back. But one of the best was with one of the students there who, in conversation, when they asked, okay, I don't understand what better is actually like. We had a little bit of a conversation about what they enjoyed in life, what they enjoy at school, what they do outside of school, appropriate to the conversation and the situation. And they were talking about how they really liked, they liked the sense of kindness that they got from some of their teachers. So I said, could you make this process kind? And after a couple of moments, the students' eyes lit up. And they realized something that they hadn't realized before. They realized that whereas they had been driven towards completing the task that I'd set for them, make it better, what they had actually done is automatically shut down their peripheral vision. They didn't understand what they could do, instead fixing false limits upon what they should do. I had to lead this person to the understanding that there are greater freedoms, perhaps, than they first thought. And that by making something better doesn't necessarily mean mechanical efficiency, although that's fine. It doesn't necessarily mean effectiveness of outcome and result, although that's also perfectly fine and a good outcome. But how do you make a process kind? How do you build love and mercy? How do you even build forgiveness into processes? How do we support transformation that is happening beyond us, but can never happen without us? We provide homes as providers. We provide a lot more. We provide great services. We provide great homes. We provide all kinds of different things. But can we provide rooms where it happens? I don't know if anyone who's been observant is noticing the reference to the musical Hamilton there with Aaron Burr. There's a fantastic song, I Want to Be in the Room Where It Happens. And I've been fortunate to spend my time in some very interesting rooms where amazing things have happened, when people have sat back in their chairs and thought, you know what, I never thought that was possible, or I never saw it that way before, or I never knew we could pull this event off. When we create opportunity for people to discover what is just beyond their horizon, the things that are possible that we might never have considered before, have we not done a good job? Have we not done something absolutely amazing and created opportunities for what might come? So the future, what does the future look like? What might the future of social housing actually look like? A few years ago, I was honoured to spend a day down in London at the Royal School of Arts. They were doing the Master of Arts program, 2-year program that they did a few years back. They were doing a presentation day, and it was absolutely amazing. There were all kinds of amazing stuff that went off there. 2 people in particular really stood out. A lady called Alison Badgett, who is working in Germany at the moment. And she had a vision of democratizing low orbit for business, for commerce, for the future innovation of humanity. A really beautiful thing, and it was so big and astounding. It captured my attention. But one thing that really struck me on the day was, I believe, there's an Indian man, and he worked in one of the massive office blocks down there in London, where there were many thousands of people who wouldn't have even known if they'd have worked each other, if they passed each other in the same building, let alone anything else. And his idea was to create connectivity within the building because it was a community. And what he did was eerily simple in one sense, but beautifully complex and rich in another. What it done is it created some cooking containers, just little things where you could put 1 or 2 portions of a particular thing. And the offer was that people could get hold of these things. They were a little bit more exciting than what you might take your snap to on a normal work day. But the idea was you took more than you needed, and you would deliberately go with the intention of sharing your lunchtime with a colleague, someone who you hadn't met before, purely to get to know them, where there was no connection, where it was outside of process, where it was outside of work stream, where it was outside of department. And people would bring whatever it is that they happened to be from. You had every continent working in a single building, people of every description. And it was quite an amazing thing. And he'd reported that the company itself had taken notice of what it actually done, him and the other person who was working alongside him. Single threads can't keep anyone warm, but tie them together. Tenants, housing officers, faith groups, youth leaders, dog walkers, and everybody else. And suddenly you have a quilt, you have a shelter, you have a home. And what if we believed genuinely and acted like we believed that housing could just be a catalyst for healing of not just individuals, but maybe of whole societies, maybe of whole communities? I think that sometimes systems forget the soul. And today I'd like us in conversation, and as you reflect beyond today's event, to reimagine housing as a heartbeat of human connection. So it just remains for me to say thank you to you all. Let's keep conversation going. If anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, there's a link there. And thank you very much, Matt, for welcoming me here.
No, you're very welcome, Jamie. And I think you can sense by the conversations in the chat that a lot of people are really kind of engaged with this very early on, which I knew they would be. So thank you for bringing it to the table. A few of the points that have come up, I'm going to go through some of the points that are raised in the chat. If you're new, please feel free either to put questions in the chat, or if you're feeling brave, please use the react symbol at the bottom of the page, and then you can click raise hand. We'd love to bring you in and hear from you. But Simon said I tried to use the word tenants and use residents instead. I'd never used the word customers, and we did a roundtable a few weeks ago on the importance and challenges of comparing housing to a customer service business, and how that looks, and the mindset compared to actually the power and those kind of things. That's I can completely understand Simon's point there. Lucy has said language is so interesting. I prefer to use tenants, and most people I speak to prefer to be called tenants rather than residents. And yet most people I work or engage with hate being called customers, yet the powers that be want to use the term customer. And I know you've probably come across this yourself. Tony's mentioned there that as a project manager, I've seen more projects fail from a lack of communication than any other reason. It happens across all industries. And then there's a bit of a conversation that I'm going to pass on to you now, Jamie, which was this started by Russell. My biggest annoyance is there not being communication. Drug teams don't talk to each other. Probation doesn't talk to the prison. Housing don't refer to each other. There need to be more pathways from everyone for everyone. And Lucy's backed this up by saying professionals and agencies need to stop hiding behind GDPR regs and think about safeguarding everyone they work with. Poor communication is so frustrating. It makes things much more difficult than they need to be when trying to support families. And Russell said exactly, and yet SUs, service users sign an NDTMS so you can share data over personal info, but they can sign to share personal info for their benefit. For your side, Jamie, in your role at the moment, which evidently is all about engagement and everything going into it, why do you think there is such a hesitancy around this willingness to share data, this willingness to kind of actually just embrace this idea of, look, leave egos at the ring, let's put human at the center of what we're really trying to achieve? Alert Call return as one of the keynote sponsors for the Social Housing Roundtable in 2025 into 2026, and we're delighted to have them back. Alert Call help as many people as possible feel safe, connected, and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. As you can see from this touchscreen I've got with me, Alert Call's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys, and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Call, an easier, simpler, and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare, and smoke alarms. Alertical will work with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and their landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023, Alertical won Housing Supplier of the Year. We're delighted to have them back with us throughout the course of this year, and please do go check them out on social media and LinkedIn to find out more. Thank you very much, Alertical, for sponsoring us again.
Wow, that's a good question. I think there's a sense, Matt, in which the sector's reeling. We're reeling from many hits, and I think it's put everybody on the, not everybody, that's an over-exaggeration. It's put a lot of people on the back foot. And instead of traipsing on our merry way to great futures, which is, you know, where we'd all ideally like to be, he says nodding, there's a sense of we've been hit by so many things that survival has become an end in itself. And if we can just get to achieving standards and doing well and making sure that we haven't burnt the place to the ground as we achieve success, we've kind of done well. What that's done is it automatically detaches us from people, because then everything becomes around achievement of process. And it can sometimes turn out, and I'm not necessarily reflecting on my own position within Berneslai Homes here, because it's not necessarily the case. But I think from what there is going across the sector, there is a hesitancy to see, because specifically around data, because we're frightened. There's almost a sense of a fear. What happens if this information should be used or accessed in a wrong way, or it's quoted and someone uses it in a, you know, tweaks it for a story, and then it actually gets back that it was this organization who shared this bit of information, and suddenly you get, you know, third-hand information being quoted in, you know, in the news, and what's the old saying about the truth, that a lie can travel around the world faster than the truth can put its trousers on. I've made a complete hash of that, but it's something like that. And we have to spend so much time fighting for the truth, and we have to, because it's worth saying. But at the same time, we're so busy trying to do everything, and, you know, trying to survive siloing, compartmentalization of services, that everything else just seems almost like a stretch too far.
The amount of confidential conversations I have under my recruitment hat, which is absolutely fine in terms of people saying, look, I'm looking for something new, but there's usually it isn't about recruitment. It's this actually what's going on with the business. This is what's happening. These are the problems. This is what we're hearing. And yet everyone's very afraid of any of that getting out, because we don't want to be seen as, it's that blame culture, isn't it? It's that mindset of going, well, actually, where we've got huge problems here. And as Nigel's put in the chat, poor communication with residents makes them feel unheard and dismissed. This can lead them to create a perception of the housing association being uncaring. But often we're so scared about going, yeah, we got that wrong, and putting that out publicly, or we made a mistake, or, you know, actually we're doing quite well here, and we know that this isn't going to please everybody, but nothing ever will. This is a decision we've made, and we're going to stick by that and do that publicly. We're so worried about it that instead we just kind of hide and send out little bits of information. Sometimes we get stuck. Judith, it's lovely to have you with us. Do please come in.
As an elderly, not very well involved tenant, I had a conversation last week with the senior manager of my housing association about the continual failure of the organisation to explain my difficulties around allergies, around mobility, and I advocate for some other tenants. And we have been asking our landlord to recognise our limitations. The person I advocate for is confined to a wheelchair. She has to have carers to move her out. That information doesn't ever seem to get through to people who are coming into our homes. And I keep being told that GDPR doesn't allow the organisation to tell the contractors who come into our homes that very basic knowledge that there are risks for us. We love to see the contractors because they're the only people that we see from our housing association. They create the communication. We feel very deprived when we hear about organisations where there are people coming and connecting with tenants in their homes, because that doesn't happen for a lot of us.
And it's that information there, Jamie. I think that probably is one of the biggest headaches you have during the working week.
I mean, not necessarily for me. I'm kind of detached from a lot of the work streams, which is an honour. But at the same time, you kind of see this. And Judith, I hear what you're saying. And just first up, I want to speak into the acknowledgement when you were talking about the sense of, and I forget the word you used. I don't know if it was frustration. Correct me if I'm wrong, Judith. When you said you hear about other organisations where engagement is happening. I hope I've got that right. Yeah, whenever we hear that something is going on elsewhere really well, sometimes it makes our own situation seem worse. And it almost makes us kind of reflect even worse upon our own situation. That's always a risk. When you expose a community within itself, what you will get is the very best highlighting the very worst, and the people who are experiencing the very worst feeling even worse. But then where judgment is removed from that, it actually helps sometimes organizations to be able to pick themselves up, because, well, if it can't get any worse, let's just acknowledge that and then build from that point, rather than kind of half making excuses and building on from there. But I think just to feed into your main point, Judith, about information that you share not necessarily being understood and passed on in a way that you would like it to. And those are the key things that you'd said, because it isn't about how information is passed on. It's about what that information means to you. What does your data mean to you? What do you want from that? There's a phrase in social therapeutic coaching that talks about when someone shares information, the question back is, how do you think I feel having heard what you have said? And I've used that in a couple of settings, and I've heard it from someone else in America who's kind of the big proponent of this, Carrie Sackett. And it's great because it actually prompts a whole level of other conversation. It's not something you usually get in the housing sector. We're not renowned for this. But at the same time, if you share and volunteer some information, it has to mean something. Otherwise, you're just taking up time. And we'll do away with that because you're not. So if you're sharing something, why are you sharing that? What are you hoping to achieve by sharing that information? How important is it to you? And then actually, what are you wanting from that? And once you get that, then you can bring in what can and we can't do through GDPR. How do we know? Are we interpreting it ourselves and standing by our own interpretation? Or are we standing by something that's a little bit more concrete? And how do we have that internal framework to move the subjective to the objective, so we can stand on something that's bona fide, but still put people like yourself, Judith, at the very heart, rather than actually put procedures and other things more at the heart.
There's a point, Barbara's put in the chat there that it's very much a collective responsibility. And Janine said, I love the thread reference. We talk lots about golden threads to ensure the customer is involved in including in all we do. The idea of tying those threads together with partners, stakeholders, and most importantly, our residents, to weave the quilt is everything. And that's exactly your point, Judith. There is no harm. If you've signed a form saying I'm happy for this to be passed on because of X, Y, Z, we too often are so worried about getting things wrong. We don't just do what's right. And I think there's a big concern with the sector in that. But David, it's lovely to have you with us. Do please come in.
Hi, just picking up on something Judith said at the start of her chat, that she likes it when the contractors go around, because sometimes that's the only contact, the only communication she gets. A really good friend of mine is a gas engineer for a housing association, large housing association. She works directly for them. And she finds that when she's going in doing a boiler service or a maintenance visit, either she senses that the resident or tenant wants to talk, or she's, there's an issue, or the resident wants to have a chat with her, even if it is just, have a chat, or if she's got a problem, she wants to share it with her, or he has a problem, wants to share it with her. She's always inclined to have that conversation and to just stay that little bit longer and listen. But she's encouraged not to, for two reasons. One, she has a target to meet of how many visits she does in the day, how many boiler services she does in the day. The other is she's not trained, and obviously different, engineers that turn up have a different level of social skills and understanding, and maybe they might say the right thing. It could be more harm than good. I just wondered, Jamie, what your view is on that.
Wow, we have something within Berneslai Homes, essentially around trying to maximise the potential from every contact. It's a great theory, and it's a great practice, but it's kind of watching out for the areas where that might not necessarily gel. If I was to say to an entire workforce, now you're going to be doing this, hold on a minute, that's not our speciality, that's not where we are. But again, how do you still put the intent in and manage the intent where you encounter things? People can be observant. Everyone can be observant, and they can notice things, and they can be very careful, and they can ask decent questions, and they can show interest in people wherever they are. I think we've got to be careful around how we do that sensitively and carefully within organisations. But again, if it is something that is considered to be what organisations actually want to provide, where, like Judith's example, if a tradesperson who goes out is the only contact or one of the more frequent elements of contact that go out, what do they want from that person? And are they wanting just to repair, because that's what they're there to do, or actually are they looking for something else that is inexpressed through other means? And so they're looking for something that is actually might be inappropriate from that particular contact, because they've gone out there to do works on the property or wherever it happens to be, but yet they're looking for something else. How do you capture that? How do you build that back into practice? And how do you get at granular level information about individuals so that please be careful when you go out and see, because they're actually not just wanting to do a repair, they're looking for human contact. They're wanting other stuff as well. How do you build that processes that support that? And how do you enable people to be able to do that safely, to do it well, and to be able to hand stuff off where it's this isn't me, but here is somebody else. And to be able to, I want to be careful with the use of the word signpost. Like I want to be careful with the rest of the language that I've used here. I know the conversation that we've had in the forum before around customers, tenants, residents, and all manner of things. The words are interchangeable. They mean different things, different people in different situations. I use tenants very specifically because essentially of what's been happened here. But I think if we can demonstrate the intent, then it might just put us in a position where we can encounter the vast majority of things and demonstrate that we're willing to learn where we get it wrong and be able to understand, so that we might be able to tailor perhaps more for individuals and learn from it.
Thank you very much. David, is there anything you'd like to say back before I bring in Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, just one extreme example, and I know this doesn't happen that often, but about a month ago, she got into a conversation with a tenant, and she was extremely concerned that this person was actually suicidal. And she called in help. She, got somebody else involved who's more in that line of things. And it turns out that this resident was about, considering ending their life. And it turns out that the involvement from the gas engineer actually did save a life. So,
How do we get the best of people in every single situation? People do things to do a job, but where is the trade-off where that's all that happens, and somehow we stop being the very best of people in the situations that we find ourselves? There's no work item, there's no task, I think, that anyone that can actually engage in where you stop being human. And if somehow a process or a task creates a dehumanizing factor, that might be over-egging it slightly, but if there's that effect in it, how do we, like I said before, how do we put kindness, love, mercy back into processes? There's no cheap and easy answer to that one. That's a deeper one, but it's certainly an area where if it had been missed, the consequences would have been particularly tragic. So the more success of that, the better, and the more we share within the sector about these successes, the better.
Thank you, Jamie. Rachel, I'm going to bring you in. I know there's a few points going in the chat that I'll come to in a moment, but we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I think one of the biggest issues with sort of communities and communities that I work in is that they've had the same systemic issues for years. before I was the tenancy services officer for the area, and I haven't got the power within the organisation and within the contractors we work to try and resolve those issues. So we end up getting to a situation where, yeah, I'm exactly the same as the tenant. I'm frustrated. I can't resolve them for them. And I think until we get to the point where we can have every department not working in silos and sort of on side, and maybe tenants being sort of aware, I'll do the best I can for them, but I don't do everything within the sector. I'm not the answer to everything. That may improve things, but it's very difficult. I've got grounds maintenance queries that have gone on for years and I can't resolve them.
I think one of the things that comes up so regularly, both in this forum but also the sector more broadly, is this frustration at disconnect sometimes between those who are out and about on patch. I don't like the term frontline, but out and about on patch, be it trades operatives, gas engineers, housing officers, tenancy sustainment, whoever it might be, and exec teams, and the disconnect between the two, and getting those messages passed up and through and saying, actually, these are the challenges we know are going on within our sectors. This is the challenge we know is happening in our communities. We would love to see this change because we think it will make a big difference, or there's a big problem here, we need to do something about it, and it just not being heard. And when you listen to Amanda from Rochdale, you know, that's one of the big cultural changes that had to happen there, because she freely puts her hand up and says, look, it's before I joined, before I was I take full ownership of the fact that our housing officers knew our Bishak was going to die or something bad was going to happen in that house. We knew it, but we weren't listening because that disconnect was too huge. And there are businesses out there doing some amazing work at reducing that and having some really good kind of methods of communication, but it's not everywhere, and it's still an ongoing challenge. And I mean, you can see from some of the chat points in the chat here, Louisa said, great presentation, love the aquarium analogy. My frustration is that we listen and understand what the resident is saying, but when you convey feedback, suggestions, nothing changes. For some organisation, it feels like a tick box exercise, and senior management dismissive of improvements to resident engagement or empowering staff to make change. Conversely, this isn't Louisa's point, but this is something I hear all the time and leads to burnout regularly. People leaving the sector because they're going, I knew what needed to change, I'm trying to help, and no one's listening. Brian has mentioned that engagement has to make a meaningful difference, and engagement means hearing and doing to make things better for everyone. Communication has to be at the level for others to understand, not in a way for corporate audience. I'll come back to your question in a minute, Brian, but I can see that's in there as well. Russell said, if you ask them where the goal is, they'll tell you it's to support people, but that isn't always the case. And Kate has said, it's only when we make it truly person-centered support that we start to make real connections. We are all so worried about getting it wrong. We lose sight of the person that's at the center of whatever situation we are trying to resolve. We need to find systems that support that person-centered solution. And Jamie, this isn't new. Yeah, this is something the sector's been talking about for a while. These narratives aren't something that it's the first time it's come on the roundtable, but we're still struggling. And yet, conversely, roles like yours wouldn't have been in a housing association 10 years ago. The positions like you're in now. So do you think we are getting better, or do you think it's still very much kind of dependent based on the business and the culture within it?
That's a good one. I think I'm not going to say if we're getting better or worse because I don't know enough. What is encouraging is the sense of awareness of the challenges that are facing us. There's an acknowledgement that they exist and the scope of them. Awareness is key. You know, if we're not aware that there's a problem, we'll just keep going on our merry way. But there's awareness. The scrabbling around sometimes for why is nothing changing? Why is nothing improving? Why are we saying things and nothing is changing? You know, all of that, the sense of collective frustration resulting in, like you said, burnout and loss of expertise and talent within the sector and everything else, a compounding problem. There's still the intention of, no, we need to shift this. And what will it take to shift it to make a considerable difference? I think what I would probably go back to is this shared sense of forcing the issue, of almost your challenge at every single level. I think the further up you go in organizations, the more fear might be a factor in decision making. A covering of the organization protectively, and that's not a bad thing, but it's a bad cause. Where does that come from? When was the last time you asked, you know, as a very senior leader in your organization, what terrifies you, and how can I help to make a difference for that? I might go and terrify one of ours later if I see anybody with that exact same question. But where are we working towards? helping our senior leaders sleep better at night? What are the things that worry them? Because I can guarantee you they won't be the things that disturb me. But then how do we actually bring to the fore the very things that they are perhaps afraid of, and I'm saying perhaps loosely, and then bring them out into the light to say, let's make sure that they never come to pass.
These are the
Let's
kind
make
of
sure we do it.
questions that, so Athena is here with me from Avalon Housing. You know, from a recruitment side, we talk about this all the time. Quite often, it's getting the hire wrong, so therefore it's just easier not to hire, or it's easier to just go, oh no, we'll just do it internally, and then we can't have an agency get it wrong. It's fear, and I think fear has really got hold of the sector in many ways, and it's getting to the stage of going, rather than going, oh cool, if we try that, imagine the successes. It's so often imagine if it goes wrong. Oh, that's great, but and this mindset of, I think because of media, because of the eyes on the sector at the moment, and because the sector has got it so wrong before as well, just means that now that innovation is starting to slow down, or that willingness to try something different, or that trust and faith in others to maybe help provide advice and guidance is really concerning. Jack has put a point in the chat here, which I wanted to raise with you actually, Jamie. So Judith raises such a good point about the additional barriers that communities face, which limit communication and prevent people disclosing data. It's amazing she's able to advocate for the person with disabilities. What about those residents that don't have the resources to advocate for themselves? Are you hearing anything, or are you working with anybody? You know, we're talking about communities within communities. Britain now is incredibly multicultural. It's incredibly diverse, both in terms of not just language and race, but also neurodiversity and disability, and all 9 of the protected characteristics. When we're talking around communication, which is not just in terms of how do I communicate with my landlord, but communicating with each other and improving those kind of relationships in communities as well. Is there anything you're hearing, or maybe undertaking yourself, to try and improve those kind of coordinated relationships of communities themselves, not just with the landlord? Case Management Solution Group, or CMSG, are the home of React, the UK's #1 case management system for ASB and community safety. We are delighted to have them as one of our key sponsors for Social Housing Roundtable 2025 into 2026. And with the ASB app now fully integrated to the platform, it allows residents to record, monitor and report issues directly to their case office in live time. What's not to love? CMSG are bringing simplicity back to case management, and I cannot recommend them enough and thank them for all of their support through this period and through the rest of the year. Thank you, CMSG, and do please go check them out on social media and on LinkedIn. Thank you. Lord.
I think you've hit on a whole topic for another conversation there, Matt, for sure. I think there's gold in them there hills. I think I'm going to say am I aware of stuff? Yeah, here and there, not necessarily in the sector, but I think more deeply and more intentionally, if we create a community, the community will speak. But if we go after particular things, we will miss 10 other things that were equally or perhaps more valuable along the way. And so it's how do we make sure that in our quest to create and bring in engaged tenants, we're not, as has been said, we're not missing, for want of a much better expression, disengaged tenants, de-engaged tenants. You know, those who don't even think that their voice is valuable, let alone try and raise it in any way, shape or form. How do we convince those people that they are that they might be understood even when their personal circumstances might not necessarily be known? How do you get to a place where understanding can be built into some of these things? And then how do you actually come back with something that's reasonable? We can all expect things that sound good, but actually are unreasonable in practice and in theory. And I think we need to balance things with something that is objectively real, rather than shooting for a utopia that is just not possible in human existence. But at the same time, are there things that are possible? There's ancient wisdom that goes back that speaks into the situation that we're facing here in this, even in the craziness of modern Britain. How do we tap into these things, and how do we make sure that the people that we have in the rooms that we're existing in the conversations that were happening, how do we make sure that we're able to say, who are we missing? What voices are we not hearing? How do we even know? How do we even scope that out? And then how do we actually create communities where we're seeking that out and actually finding that out? There's some hefty stuff there. I'd love to see policy shaped by stuff like that personally. I'd love to see, I think a lot of people would, I'm not just my own. I know the realities of the difficulties of building that in when there are budgets to meet and everything else. But at the same time, if fear is an obstacle, then to use someone else's phrase, just start. If courage is what you do when you're scared, not overcoming it, then, take a look around each of us in our own situation, find something that doesn't look good, that smells bad, and just have at it. Start making a difference wherever you are. Just very briefly, we had a look at onboarding within Berneslai Homes a couple of years ago, and this process of how do we make sure that if we say that people are our greatest resource and all of that kind of phrasing, then onboarding's got to be a big thing. How do we make it brilliant? And we pulled together a team of people who they owned no process, but they were heavily involved in it. And we actually revised the whole process within a section of the business and actually created something within the organization that someone actually described as beautiful. And I use it with, very deliberately. I've never heard processes called beautiful before, but it was amazing. And there were people there who thought, I never thought that I would be listened to. I never thought I could make a difference to something like this. And we had a great conversation about, well, why did you think that? Because you're great. You brought some great wisdom. You were the one who actually been able to point at things that none of the rest of us saw. What are you going to do now with that? And it kind of opened a door for it. And it's that, well, just pick something. It doesn't have to be something groundbreaking and massive. It can be something on the face of it, particularly small, that you might think isn't that great. But who knows what it might just create? Who knows what you might actually do for somebody else when you bring them in and convince them that actually they have something to bring to the table as well.
And that's so often cultural. Having a culture that allows you to do that is so often a challenge. And the amount of people I know who've moved business, moved sector, left the sector, whatever it might be, because they were wanting to do that and not being heard, that's unfortunately a massive challenge that we've got. I do think it's improving in some places, but it's definitely still something to work on. And you can see a number of points in the chat. It's interesting when we talk about some of the points around safeguarding and training. I can see some people mentioning in the chat there, Russell had mentioned around training needs on this. A lot of this is about, not knowing what we don't know and needing training and needing upskilling. And one of the first, one of the reasons the roundtable exists is because there was a business which came to me back during 2020, so back during when COVID was, at its peak, and talking about using contractors to do safeguarding checks for the first time because they were the only ones allowed in the homes. Mm-hmm. Fast forward 5 years, and we're still talking about the same subject and going, well, hang on, why can't contractors do safeguarding checks? And I was going to quote which housing association it is, and I'm absolutely second guessing myself on which one it is, so I'm not going to mention them, but I think I know. But there's a group that've got it's simply an email address called Something's Not Right. And so the premise behind it is that no matter who you are, if you are entering a tenant's home at any point, and you can just sense, it could be a door's hanging off, it could just be a gut feeling, it could be there's something you're looking at or whatever it will be, you can just email this Something's Not Right email address. It goes centrally to about 6 different people in different teams. Someone will take ownership of going, cool, well, we need to have a look at that then. Who's going to have a look at it? And the difference it's made, sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it isn't, but there are times they've caught stuff like domestic violence, like other things going on, like cuckooing, then no one else was picking up because they weren't in the properties. And I think things like that are really key. And you can see from the chat, Hazel's put whether you work for a housing association internally or are contracted to deliver services on their behalf, everyone entering residents' homes and working communities should be safeguard trained. This protects both residents and the workforce and generates social value. And I know Hazel set up Synergy Safeguarding to look at this, and the best of luck to her with her new business. Russell has said, I mentioned Russell's, but Lucy had responded, training is lacking in many areas. Staff want to be trained, but sometimes told there's no budget. Housing has got a completely different conversation at the time, but housing has got a big problem with spending now to save later or to solve future problems because budgets are so tight, but equally we're, again, quite risk averse. Nigel has mentioned that communication with residents is difficult to get right. Some love to talk, others not so much. Some just want to be left alone. Some residents change day to day. There's technology and service out there that will allow the resident to control how much content they receive. And obviously, Alertical are a big sponsor of the roundtable, and their technology does this wonderfully. Beatrice, I think that's one of the things about relationship working. You really are walking with the residents and encountering the same barriers. Definitely important for organisations to actively create the conditions for relational working. I also think we need to reform governance to focus on systemic learning. Ted has said, how about employing more tenants? I'm absolutely a huge advocate for this. I know some businesses are doing really well and others have far more to go. And Ted said, sometimes this feels like a scenario of us versus them. And Lucy said, but so many of us don't want it to be like that. We strive daily to include and engage with our tenants, yet when we try to improve things or make suggestions, we come up against the same barriers our tenants do. And Ryan said, I couldn't agree more. We put so much time and effort to speak to our residents and listen to their thoughts and struggles and then implement changes that will have a positive influence. But the barriers we face from the top stops from making the big, meaningful difference that needs to happen systemically. There's more points coming through, which I'll try and summarise in a moment. But Jamie, just in terms of going into those last few minutes we've got, in fact, there's 3 points left. Let me summarise them for you. So Louise, slightly different to face-to-face engagement, but I manage a customer service team for a local housing provider and would often suggest to senior managers spend time with the team and listen to calls to understand that customer experience and stumbling blocks better. The culture of designing policies needs to change. Brian, conversation is a two-way road and many times it's telling rather than listening. Building trust is key, and I can see the word trust has come up many, many times in the chat today. And Beatrice has said it's definitely valuable in policy and strategy. I worked with disabled residents to co-produce the first disabled people's housing strategy. And then we worked together around implementing it. I think the fact we worked together gave the work way more potential, but also built better relationships. And Jamie, this seems to be the big thing, is you look through that chat there, you send that to every chief exec. It's obvious what needs to happen. It's break down barriers. It's start listening to your, those staff that are out on the ground all the time. It's engaging with people like yourself, Jamie, who are constantly in that miasma of understanding the relationship breakdowns and where they are. And yet we're still seeing the same news coming out week on week and challenges week on week. And obviously the conversation today was of communities within communities. And love the title, by the way. Massive kudos to you for it. But is it simply that, we're still doing things the same old way and we're waiting for new leaders to come through and it's culture that needs to change? Or is it simply that we're just a little bit too afraid to take those first few steps and go, actually, you know what? Let's really try and just... It's that mindset of people like myself with ADHD, and it comes in all the time. Oh, but if I start that, then that's going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to happen. It's too much, right? We just won't start. Someone somewhere has to start, don't they, Jamie? Because otherwise we're going to keep having this conversation in 5, 10, 15 years' time.
Definitely. There's an old story about someone who was being chased away. They were being chased away from the village or whatever else, and everybody else scarpered, but they decided that they would try and fight their opponent in a field of lentils because they thought it was worthwhile. Just an amazing story. And I've always been encouraged by it. It's like, where I'm not excited by lentils. I'm a happy carnivore. Apologies to anybody else on the call who isn't. But at the same time, where's your field of lentils? Where are the things that other people would just run past without a moment's notice? But you think, actually, this is worth something. This is going to be of nutritional value. This is going to be a sustenance to our communities. This is going to be something that is powerful. And if no one else is going to do it, then it's going to have to be me. Otherwise, I'm going to have to live with the consequences of my actions forever. Where is it that we start? And like I said before, can I make massive change to the whole nation in policy and whatever else? Highly unlikely. But who knows? I'm not saying that anything's impossible. But exactly at the same time, what's the change that stands in front of you? What difference can you make to this person? Where are the Judiths of the world whose experiences and lives can be completely changed? Who can have a different story written into their life because one day you stopped running and you turned around because you faced your fear, because you decided to take a stand, because you thought, actually, this is worth something, either because our organization says it is and you dare to hold someone else to account in a right way. There's a wrong way to do it and there's a right way. Or you say, actually, I'm going to make a stand here and I'm going to see who else will join me, because with things like that, there's plenty of others as well. I'm seeing people are putting here that the starfish story. I absolutely love this. I've heard this 1,000 times before. Yeah, it matters to this one. Why are you saving this starfish? Because it matters to this one. So what's the value of whatever single flower growing in the middle of a wood? Well, because it is seen. And because it is beautiful all by itself. Where are the things in social housing that actually are beautiful? They're actually of real worth. that might make a difference and be transforming for the whole of, not just within the sector, but for our country, for the people who live in our neighbourhoods and in our communities.
Jamie, a huge thank you. You talk about what can we do to start and that kind of thing. I put out a post last week saying who can come on and talk about a topic, and you've brought this topic to the table today. That is a start. And it's very easy for me to, just say, oh yeah, someone come on. I know how nervous it is for anyone coming on to do a first thing like this, if you're coming on or anything like that. So a huge thank you to you, a huge thank you to everyone who comes on and speaks, because it takes someone putting their head above the parapet and going, actually, you know what, here is my opinion on something. And I'm going to talk to, today I think we capped out about 68, 70 peers. I'm going to talk to 68, 70 peers today on a topic. I'm going to talk about it passionately, and I'm going to talk about it eloquently. And I'm going to go, actually, you might disagree with me, and that's okay. This is an opinion. Let's try and move forward there. What more can we do collaboratively to make change? So huge thank you to you. Do please reach out to Jamie on LinkedIn if you want to follow up the conversation. It's Jamie Adam on LinkedIn, Berneslai Homes. You can find him there. I can always make connections, but a massive thank you to you. We're back every Tuesday. If you are new to our community, we do this every single Tuesday at 11 a.m. But massive thanks to you, Jamie, for coming on today and for being part of the community. Thank you.
You are very welcome indeed. Thank you to everyone for the conversation. It's been a good morning.
Thanks very much. Cheers all, and see you again. Take care.
Take care.